Hello and welcome back to another FPL team selection video. We are on the penultimate game week and unfortunately it was another red arrow for myself after the differentials that we brought in last week did not pay off. We are now into the bottom 500k, which is not really where we wanted to be with 2 game weeks to go. So at this point it's really just going all out with the last couple of weeks. Personally, I'm top of my mini league right now, so I may just play it a little bit safer, but I'm going to wait and see what happens with that. But at this point, you know, a decent rank is well off the table into the 300k's and stuff that I was kind of hoping to get. The last big hurrah was that Haaland captaincy against Southampton, and unfortunately that game ended up with a 0-0 result and Haaland blanking, so that wasn't really going to be the best of scores anyway. You know, a couple of decent results from our other players. You know, Muno's done really well with an 11 pointer, 6 points from Vardiol, 6 from Embuemo, 6 from Sarr, all really nice returns. 8 from Bowen was really good as well. Other than that, it was all blanks. Now 49 points over the total is obviously what brought me down to that 500k spot. So at this point it is really just, you know, hoping I can, you know, win the mini league at the end of the day, and you know, just have a little bit of fun with it over the next couple of weeks. Now the bench actually done really well, as you can see. You know, 8 points from Verbruggen, 5 from Murphy and 7 from Livramento. Would have ended up being a 20-point bench boost, but again, what can you do at the end of the day? They all had pretty difficult fixtures. Obviously Verbruggen picking up an 8-pointer was fantastic, but Brighton have been a terrible defence recently and ended up playing Raya against Liverpool, and he didn't do too well either. So, you know, overall very average. I think the captaincy has what has been the thing that's let me down the most. Was really hoping for big things from Haaland once it was confirmed he was going to be starting. Fortunately, it didn't happen, but we are going to be keeping hold of him for the next couple of weeks. But let's take a look at game week 37. So this is how the fixtures are looking this week, and again, it's kind of hard to make transfers this week. A lot of the teams that have a nice fixture don't really have the best of fixtures in game week 38 for that last game. Of course, Everton against Southampton at home. Again, if you were to free hit this week, you'd probably be looking at a double, maybe a triple Everton defence, or at least triple Everton in general, because obviously it is going to be the last game at Goodison Park, and they are, you know, the atmosphere is probably going to be fantastic, and I can see Everton doing really well in that match. I only own O'Brien myself. Someone like Beto would be a really good player to have, and then maybe like a Pickford or a Mikolenko in there as well. However, that game week 38 fixture away to Newcastle is really what does put you off that transfer. I have 3 Palace players right now who are all playing against Liverpool in game week 38, so I can't really, you know, go for punts in game week 37 without them having a decent enough fixture in game week 38 to have the best, you know, team on the final day. So an Everton transfer doesn't really make sense for me. Forest are kind of similar. You know, Chelsea in game week 38 are one of the best defences in the league this season. Obviously that is looking like it could be a top 4, you know, playoff essentially, with whoever goes through there. So like a Chris Woods is probably going to be pretty decent. Obviously I own Nico Williams at this point, you know, Alanga and stuff like that. There is a lot of decent options there. For Ipswich, they're easily the team with the best fixtures, but obviously no one's going to be bringing in Ipswich players because they have nothing to play for. They're already relegated, and there's no really good assets that you can go for from Ipswich, so it kind of rules them out as well. Villa look pretty decent, obviously playing against Spurs. Obviously, if you watch this week's captaincy video, Ollie Watkins looks like a fantastic option for this week. Spurs at home in game week 37, and then an okay fixture in game week 38 against Manchester United. Don't really mind that at all. However, you know, obviously players like Ollie Watkins, personally, I'm not going to be able to afford. After looking at my team, you know, he's probably one of the only players that I would go for this week, but I can't afford Watkins without taking a -4, and there's no one really else that I would like to get in my squad at this minute in time. And the only players I would like to take out is Crystal Palace players who are playing against Wolves at home this week, and I don't really want to take a -4 to get, you know, those players out. So it doesn't really make sense for me to get in Watkins, but he's definitely my favourite transfer of the week this week, and he's obviously, you know, that's a shared opinion with a lot of other managers, as he is the top transferred in player this week. But yeah, for me it would be, you know, Ollie Watkins if I could potentially go there. Unfortunately, it just isn't going to happen this week. For Chelsea, again, Man United at home is a nice fixture, but away to Nottingham Forest isn't really too great. And again, they don't really have a lot of good FPL assets at the minute. Cole Palmer's been honking for about 10 to 15 weeks now at this point. And other than that, there's just not really too many players that get me too excited. So there's no one really there from Chelsea I'll be looking at. And then, of course, we've got Leicester, who are playing against Ipswich at home. Nice fixture, and then not the best fixture again against Bournemouth, plus Leicester obviously really poor this season, and no real players that you would want to go for in that sense either. These were some of the differentials / just players in general that I was considering. And of course, Jamie Vardy was going to be in there. I've got Asensio in there. I've got Eze, Beto as well. 4 players that I did heavily consider for a potential transfer this week. But I think I'm just going to keep that transfer until game week 38. And I feel like it will have better use for then. Right now, I just feel like there's too many negatives to bringing in some of these players. For example, Asensio is looking like a bit of a minutes risk for game week 38, so I don't think I want to be bringing in him, because then I end up with a poor game week 38, and you obviously can't guarantee that he's going to do well in game week 37 either. Jamie Vardy would have definitely brought him in, I think, this week for Mateta had he been playing in game week 38, but it looks as though that is now confirmed that he is not going to be playing in game week 38 because he wants the final home game for Leicester to be his final match. So he's not going to play in game week 38, which again makes him an obsolete option, for the last 2 weeks of FPL. I've got Eze as well, a really nice game this week against Wolves in fantastic form as well. But that game against Liverpool in game week 38 is obviously one that I'm not going to want to own him for. So it just kind of rules him out as a pick as well. Palace obviously sitting in, I think, 12th right now with nothing to play for either, so it doesn't really get me too excited for one of my final 2 transfers of the season. Then Beto as well, already spoke a little bit about him. Having Southampton at home, I think he easily does well in game week 37, but again, game week 38, you just kind of rule him out as a decent option. Newcastle away, I can't see them doing well. That final game at Goodison's going to be gone now, and Newcastle have top 4 to fight for and stuff like that. I think Newcastle run all over the top of Everton in that game, and I don't think Beto really does anything there. So for me, 4 differential picks that I think would be great this week. They're just not really catching the eye, for the final 2 matches of the season. So I think I'm just going to be looking at rolling the transfer this week, which is going to leave me with a team like this. Now, I'm not the most excited about this team. At the end of the day, I've still got 3 Crystal Palace players and 2 Man City players who are playing in the FA Cup final this weekend. So that is why I have benched Mateta, because I don't want to have that triple Palace 2 or 3 days after they play in the FA Cup final. So Mateta's on the bench, and I'm going to play Evan Nelson over him. I'm hoping he can at least grab a goal against Man City. It is Kevin De Bruyne's final game as well at the Etihad, but I'm hoping Evan Nelson can potentially do something there. I think Bournemouth are still fighting for Europe as well. A little bit of a setback last week, but I think there is still a decent chance, a hopeful chance that they can do something. So they're really going to have to come out and try and get a result. So I just hope Evan Nelson can just snag a goal. I think Mateta's minutes are going to be very much reduced as well. We've seen it in the past couple of weeks, and if he's going to be playing mainly in that FA Cup final match, I think he probably gets an early sub, especially considering Palace have nothing to play for on Tuesday when they do play against Wolves. I'm still holding on to Munoz and Sarr though. They're 2 players who have been pretty decent in the last couple of weeks, so hopefully they can do well. We've got O'Brien against Southampton. Hopefully he's back in time. I think he will be, and they can obviously get a clean sheet, and hopefully he can do well there. Vardy all against Bournemouth, Williams against West Ham. A decent enough defence that I can hopefully do something with. Obviously Salah against Brighton and Mbeumo against Fulham. Again, not the best fixtures in the world, but they are capable of getting points. Bowen is the one that I'm considering as a potential captaincy option against Nottingham Forest. Obviously, they have been very poor defensively in recent weeks. Bowen has been on great form, picking up, about 6 to 8 points in his last couple of games, and I think he's a decent option for captain. I'm very, very stumped for captaincy this week. That's why I wanted to get Watkins in, because I would have brought him in and captained him, but it just doesn't really work for my team, unfortunately, this week. So Haaland does have the armband right now against Bournemouth, but again, I'm not the most convinced by that. So really I'm just looking between, potentially Haaland or Bowen as a captaincy pick this week. But happy with the bench. Verbruggen is on the bench against Liverpool. I actually would be quite tempted to play Verbruggen over Raya. I think the fact that Newcastle and Arsenal, is such a big game, with Newcastle potentially overtaking Arsenal in that match and going second, I think there's a good chance that Newcastle go and score in that match. So I was kind of tempted as well to play Murphy as well, but there was no real option to sub out for him. So Murphy is on the bench. But Verbruggen against Liverpool, obviously Liverpool have been, out on holiday and stuff like that. So are they really going to be up for this match? Brighton playing at home as well. It could be a last minute change that I do make, bringing in Verbruggen for Raya, and he could definitely get some saves in there as well. But other than that, there's not really too much to talk about this week. I'm going to be rolling, which is going to give me 2 free transfers to use in game week 38, which should be a little bit more interesting. But that is going to be it for today's video. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, make sure to subscribe as well if you are new, and I'll see you all in the next one.